Trevor did not shout. He did not cry. He did not do any of the things a man is supposed to do when he is about to destroy someone in front of everyone who loves her. He simply raised one hand. Before we get into the story, if you love intense underworld drama like this, make sure you subscribe to Whispers in the Underworld. You don't want to miss what is coming next. The priest stopped mid-sentence. The ballroom went still. Chioma stood at the altar in her white off-shoulder gown, bouquet pressed against her chest, and watched Trevor lower his hands slowly, straighten the lapels of his white tuxedo jacket, and turn to face the congregation, not her, the congregation, as if he were about to address a board meeting. "I can't marry her," he said. His voice was steady, almost gentle. "I've made other arrangements. I'm sorry." That was all. No explanation. No trembling. No last look at her face. Just those words, delivered to the room like a closing statement, and then he clasped his hands in front of him and looked at the floor. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the ballroom came apart. Gasps. Voices layering over each other. The screech of chair legs on marble. Someone near the front, Chioma would never know who, let out a sound that was almost a laugh, then swallowed it. Phones rose. First 1, then 5, then too many to count, all of them pointed at her, all of them recording the exact expression on her face at the exact moment her life stopped making sense. Chioma did not move. She stood exactly where she had been standing, bouquet still raised, veil still straight, because her body had not yet agreed to process what her ears had just heard. She was aware of the heat of 300 pairs of eyes. She was aware of the chandeliers above her, still blazing, indifferent. She was aware of the white flowers banked against every surface of this room she had spent 4 months choosing, and how obscene they looked now, all that beauty, arranged for a ceremony that had just been cancelled in 11 words. At the back of the ballroom, near the entrance where the light was low and the crowd thinned, a man stood watching her. Tall. East Asian. A black suit so precisely cut it looked like it had been made for this room and no other. No tie, the collar open just enough to reveal the edge of a tattoo climbing the side of his neck, dark ink against skin, something deliberate about it, something that suggested a life with a very specific kind of history. His arms were relaxed at his sides. His face was completely still. Every other person in that ballroom was reacting. Turning, whispering, reaching for a phone, leaning toward a neighbor. This man did none of those things. He simply watched Chioma with a focused, unhurried attention, the way you watch something you knew was coming, not with satisfaction, not with cruelty, just with the calm of someone who has already decided what happens next. Trevor began walking toward the exit. Something cracked open inside Chioma's chest. She gathered her skirt in both fists and moved, heels sharp on the marble, bouquet falling somewhere she did not register, veil pulling at her hair, because 3 years of her life were walking out of that room and she could not stand still and let them go without at least. A hand closed around her wrist. Not hard. Not rough. Just there. A wall. Don't. The voice was low and completely even. Chioma spun toward it and found herself looking up at the man from the back of the room. Up close he was broader than she'd registered, the neck tattoo more intricate, a dark sweep of lines that disappeared beneath his collar. His eyes were on her face and there was no pity in them, which hit her harder than pity would have. "Let go of me." Her voice came out wrong, high, fractured, the voice of someone trying not to drown. "I need to. I have to talk to him, I have to." "No," the man said. Simple. Final. No aggression in it at all, which somehow made it more immovable than a shout. "You don't need to go after him. You don't need to explain yourself to a man who just ended your wedding in front of everyone you know. You don't need to beg him for anything. Let him leave. You don't know anything about," she pulled against his grip. It didn't give. Who are you? Why are you touching me? Why are you even here? He looked at her for one moment. Then he released her wrist. And turned. He moved past her into the aisle, not hurrying, not performing, just walking with a quietness of purpose that made the crowd part around him without anyone appearing to decide to move. Down the long center of the ballroom. Past the stunned faces and the raised phones and the flower arrangements and the untouched champagne glasses lined up on the table near the back wall. Toward the altar. Chioma followed him. She did not choose to. She simply found herself moving in the same direction, pulled along in the wake of whatever he was, because she had lost the ability to decide anything for herself in the last 90 seconds and her feet apparently still knew how to work. He climbed the altar steps. The officiant, who had been standing frozen since Trevor's announcement, Bible clutched in both hands like a shield, took one step back, then another. The man in the black suit stopped in the exact spot where Trevor had been standing 3 minutes ago, and he turned around. He looked at Chioma. Then he held out his hand. Palm up. Fingers open. An invitation so calm it bordered on outrageous. She stared at it. This stranger, this man she had never seen before this morning, was standing at her altar with his hand extended like he had always been going to be here. Like the ceremony had simply been waiting for the right person to arrive and fill the space Trevor had left. Come here, he said. Quietly. With a certainty that should not have existed. Her feet moved. She walked up the steps. Her hands were shaking. Her heels were silent on the marble. She placed her hand in his, and his palm was warm and rough in a way that had no business feeling familiar, and his fingers closed around hers with a gentleness that was completely at odds with every other thing about him. He turned to face the congregation. The entire ballroom was holding its breath. 300 people. Not one of them moved. When he spoke, he did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. Stop the wedding. A pause. Just long enough. I'll marry her instead. Nobody breathed. The chandeliers blazed on. The flowers stood in their arrangements, white and indifferent. Somewhere near the back, a phone dropped and the sound of it hitting the floor was the only thing anyone could hear. And then the entrance doors burst open. Trevor came back in. His white tuxedo jacket was pulled at the shoulder where he'd moved too fast. His bow tie had shifted. His face, that careful, composed face that had delivered 11 words and walked away without a tremor, was no longer composed at all. He stood in the entrance with his hands at his sides and his eyes fixed on the altar, and when his gaze landed on the man standing where he had stood, holding the hand of the woman he had just left, something happened to his expression that Chioma had never seen on him before. He recognized him. The room felt it, the collective lean forward, the intake of breath, the sudden sharp awareness that this was no longer just about a wedding falling apart. Trevor's face had gone the particular color of a man who has just realized he has stepped into something much larger than he understood, and that the exit he thought he'd taken has somehow brought him back to the very place he was trying to leave. He opened his mouth. You can't, his voice came out unsteady, which was its own kind of revelation. She's who do you think you? The man at the altar turned his head. Just his head. Slowly. And looked at Trevor. He didn't speak. He didn't shift his weight. He simply moved his gaze from the congregation to the man in the aisle, and the quality of that look, patient, absolute, unimpressed, made Trevor stop speaking mid-sentence as if the words had been taken from him. The silence stretched. Trevor's hand, which had been rising toward the altar, came back down. He stood there for 3 full seconds, his mouth slightly open, his eyes moving between Chioma and the man holding her hand. And Chioma watched something pass through his expression that she had never once seen on his face in 3 years, something she could only identify as fear. Then Vincenzo Cassano turned back to the officiant. Proceed, he said. Vincenzo moved through the ballroom doors without looking back, and somehow Chioma's legs carried her after him. She was aware of the noise behind her, her mother's voice cutting above everything else, high and desperate, calling her name, and her father somewhere in the chaos, and her bridesmaids, and the 290-odd other people who had just watched her wedding become something that would be talked about for the rest of their lives. She was aware of all of it the way you are aware of weather through glass. Present. Distant. Not quite reaching her. Outside, a black car was already waiting at the curb. A man in a dark suit held the rear door open. He did not react to her wedding dress, to her bare expression, to any of it. Vincenzo guided her inside with one hand at her elbow, not gripping, not pulling, just there, and then he was beside her and the door closed and the city sealed itself off behind the tinted windows. The car moved immediately. Chioma pressed her hands flat against her thighs and stared at the partition ahead of her and tried to locate something inside herself that felt like solid ground. She couldn't find it. "Who are you?" Her voice came out quieter than she intended. She tried again. "What do you want from me? People don't do what you just did. No one does that. There has to be something you want." Vincenzo was looking straight ahead. When he answered, his tone was the same as it had been at the altar, unhurried, unperformed. "Nothing," he said. "I want nothing from you. I only wanted you to leave that room as something other than the woman everyone watched fall apart." Chioma turned to look at him. "I don't believe you." He didn't argue. He didn't even glance at her. He simply let the silence sit between them, steady and unbothered, the way he seemed to let everything sit. She turned back to the window. And it was only then, only in the quiet of that moving car, watching her city scroll past in the wrong direction, that it occurred to her she had gotten in. The elevator opened directly into the apartment, and Chioma stepped out into a world that had nothing to do with her life. Floor-to-ceiling windows on every wall. The city spread out below them like a circuit board lit from within, vast and indifferent and beautiful in a way that felt almost accusatory. The furniture was dark and clean-lined, everything in its place, nothing excessive. It was the kind of space that didn't need to announce what it cost. It simply was. A woman appeared from a side hallway, small, Korean, with silver-streaked hair pulled back precisely. She looked at Chioma with calm, careful eyes, taking in the wedding dress and the ruined makeup and the bouquet Chioma had apparently been carrying since the ballroom without noticing. She said something quietly to Vincenzo in Korean. He responded in 2 words. The woman nodded and turned to Chioma with a small, deliberate smile. "This is Mrs. Song," Vincenzo said. "She'll take care of whatever you need." Mrs. Song led her down a hallway to a bedroom larger than any room Chioma had ever slept in. On the bed, folded with quiet precision, were clothes, soft trousers, a loose shirt. Chioma looked at them for a moment and then looked at Mrs. Song, who gestured gently toward the end suite and left, pulling the door closed behind her. Chioma stood alone in the middle of the room. Then she walked into the bathroom, turned the shower to hot, sat down on the floor of it, and let everything she had been holding since the altar come apart in the steam and the noise of the water where no one could hear it. She did not know how long she stayed there. Long enough for the water to cool. Long enough to stop shaking. She changed. She lay down. She slept. When she woke, the room was dark and the city glittered silently beyond the glass, and for one suspended moment she didn't know where she was. Then she remembered. She stared at the ceiling and felt the fear move through her slowly, and underneath it, something quieter, something she almost didn't recognize. The clothes had been in her exact size. He had been prepared. He had known. That should have terrified her more than anything else. Instead, for the first time in longer than she could honestly remember, she did not feel alone. And that frightened her most of all. Her phone was on the nightstand. She didn't remember putting it there. Someone had placed it carefully beside a glass of water and a small folded towel, and the screen was alive with notifications, a wall of missed calls and messages that she could feel the weight of before she even picked it up. Her mother had called 11 times. She pressed call and it connected before the first ring finished. Chioma. Her mother's voice arrived already broken, already past the point of composure. Chioma, oh God, where are you? Are you hurt? Who is that man? Your father wants to call the police. Everyone is asking and I don't know what to tell them. I don't know what happened, I don't. Mama. Chioma closed her eyes. I'm safe. I'm not hurt. Safe where? With who? You got into a car with a stranger, Chioma, you married a stranger, how am I supposed to? I know. Your father is furious. Your sisters have been calling everyone. Auntie Grace fainted, they had to. Mama. Her voice came out sharper than she meant it to. She steadied herself. I need you to listen to me. The line went quiet. Chioma opened her eyes and looked at the window, at the city beyond it, at the dark. Trevor stopped that wedding in front of every person who has ever known me, she said. He stood at that altar and announced he didn't want me and then he walked away. And I was standing there alone. Her throat tightened. She pushed through it. Not one person came up to stand beside me. Not one. He did. This man I don't know came and stood beside me when everyone who was supposed to love me just watched. Silence on the line. I'm safe, Chioma said, more quietly. That's all I can give you right now. She heard her mother begin to cry, soft, helpless sounds, and she pressed her hand flat against her sternum and breathed. From the hallway, just beyond the half-open door, Vincenzo stood with his back against the wall, his eyes on the middle distance. Still. Listening. He did not move away. Mrs. Song set the food down without ceremony and disappeared, the way she seemed to understand instinctively when her presence was no longer needed. The table was small. The city burned quietly beyond the glass. Chioma picked up her fork, set it back down, and looked at Vincenzo across the table. I need the truth, she said. Not the version you think I can handle. The actual truth. He considered her for a moment. Then he set down his own fork and gave it to her without dressing it up. He ran an organization. Had for 11 years. It operated in the space where legal structures ended and other arrangements began, territories in the city that answered to him, imports that bypassed channels that asked too many questions, financial constructions that would not survive close scrutiny. The people who worked for him were loyal, and they protected his interests, and the methods they used were not always the kind that could be discussed in polite company. He said all of it the same way he said everything, evenly, without apology, without performance. When he finished, the silence sat between them for a long moment. You could have told me none of that, Chioma said. You asked for the truth. Most people would have lied. I'm not most people. She looked at him steadily. So what happens to me now? Nothing, if you don't want it to. He leaned back slightly. I can have the marriage dissolved quietly. A narrative prepared, something close enough to the truth that it holds. You walk away from this with your dignity intact and no further complications. And if I stayed? Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not softness exactly. Something older than that. Then you stay, he said. Until you're ready to leave. Why would you offer me that? He was quiet for a moment. When he answered, his voice was lower than usual, and it carried the particular weight of something that had been true for a long time. Because I know what it costs, he said, to be humiliated in front of people who were supposed to show up for you. Chioma looked at him across the small table with the city glittering behind him and made her decision. I'll stay, she said. But no more half answers. Not ever. He nodded once. Agreed. She heard the elevator before she heard him. It had become a habit without her noticing, the way she registered the soft mechanical sound of it arriving at the penthouse floor, the way her attention would shift slightly toward the entrance without her deciding to let it. She was on the couch with a book she hadn't been reading for the past 40 minutes when Vincenzo came through the door. She knew immediately that something was different. It wasn't anything dramatic. His suit was still immaculate, his posture still controlled. But there was a weight to the way he moved, a friction, as if the evening had cost him something he hadn't budgeted for. He set his keys down on the console table and stood there for a moment with his back to her before he turned around. Trevor came to my offices today, he said. Chioma closed the book. What did he want? To explain that this situation has gone far enough. That you belong to him and that I should return you to your life before things become complicated. A pause. He was not asking. What did you do? Had him escorted out. Something that was almost dry humor moved across his face and was gone. He left with his pride slightly rearranged. Chioma exhaled, and then, without entirely meaning to, she laughed. Just briefly. Just enough. Vincenzo looked at her when she laughed. That was the thing she would remember afterward, the way he looked at her in that specific moment, something unguarded crossing his expression before he had the chance to govern it. The room went quiet in a different way than it usually did. She became aware of how close she was standing. When she had moved from the couch she couldn't say. The city light came through the windows at a low angle and the space between them felt charged with something that had been accumulating for days without either of them naming it. Then Vincenzo stepped back. You're still in the middle of it, he said quietly. Not coldly. Almost carefully. And he turned and walked from the room. Chioma stood where she was. She had expected many things from him. Distance, she had gotten before. But this, the deliberate, considered nature of his restraint, left her more undone than any other thing he could have done. She didn't recognize the number, which was why she answered. Chioma. Trevor's voice came through the phone exactly as she remembered it, measured, confident, calibrated. Even now. Even calling a number he shouldn't have. Please don't hang up. She didn't. She wasn't sure why. I need you to know it wasn't what it looked like, he said. I panicked. I've been under pressure you don't know about, the other arrangement, that was my father, it wasn't something I chose, I was being pushed into something and I handled it wrong. I handled it terribly. But what I said up there, I didn't mean it. I love you. I have always loved you. Chioma sat with the phone against her ear and looked at the window. I will fix this, Trevor said. Whatever it takes. Just tell me where you are. Let me come to you. She waited to feel something. She searched for it honestly, the grief, the pull, the part of her that had loved him for 3 years and might still. She waited for her chest to tighten or her eyes to sting or her resolve to develop a fracture somewhere along its edge. Nothing came. Just a vast, a quiet distance, like looking at a place you used to live from the window of a moving car. Don't call me again, she said. And ended the call. She set the phone face down on the cushion beside her and sat very still. She was still sitting that way when she heard the elevator. Vincenzo crossed the room without a word, and lowered himself onto one knee in front of her, not theatrical, just level, bringing his eyes to hers. What happened? She told him. All of it. He listened the way he always listened, completely, without interrupting. He won't reach you again, he said when she finished. I'll make certain of it. She reached out and took his hand before she decided to. Don't hurt him, she said. Please. He's not worth the cost of that. Vincenzo looked at her for a moment, then nodded. She didn't let go of his hand. He didn't move to take it back. She asked him after dinner, while the plates were still on the table and the city was doing its quiet nighttime thing beyond the glass. Why do you keep pulling back? Vincenzo looked up. He didn't pretend not to understand the question. You know why, he said. I want you to say it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he set down his glass and gave her the same thing he always gave her when she asked directly, the truth, without decoration. Because I will not be the man you reach for when you're trying to undo what he did to you, he said. You were humiliated. You were broken open in front of everyone. And I was there, and I helped, and now I am the closest thing to solid ground in a life that lost its footing. That's not a reason to want someone. His eyes stayed on hers, steady and unsparing. I don't want to be a remedy. I want to be a choice. Chioma listened to all of it. Then she looked at him for a long moment across the small table with the remnants of dinner between them and the whole glittering city behind him, and she thought about what it meant to reach for something out of damage versus reaching for something because some part of you had been quietly, stubbornly moving toward it for weeks without your permission. I'm not running from him, she said. Vincenzo waited. I'm walking toward you. She held his gaze. There's a difference. I know what it feels like to do something out of desperation. This isn't that. He watched her for a moment that stretched long enough that she felt the weight of it in her sternum. Say it again, he said quietly. I'm walking toward you. He stood. Came around the table. Took her face in both hands the way she had seen him do, nothing, with complete, unhurried intention, and kissed her. Not like the altar. Nothing like the altar. This was every restrained thing finally let go, and it asked nothing except that she stay exactly where she was. She did. She was in the kitchen with coffee when the elevator opened without warning. The man who stepped out was older than Vincenzo, late 50s, silver at his temples, a face that looked like it had been making hard decisions for a very long time. He wore a dark suit and he moved like someone who did not expect to be stopped. He looked at Chioma once, briefly, with an expression that did not bother to conceal its assessment, and then he turned toward the hallway and said something in Korean, his voice already raised. Vincenzo appeared from the study. What followed lasted perhaps 4 minutes and Chioma understood none of the words, but she understood enough. The older man's gestures. The controlled fury in his voice. The way he kept his eyes deliberately away from her, as if acknowledging her presence directly would be a concession he wasn't prepared to make. Vincenzo said very little. When he did speak it was quiet, which somehow made it more final than anything the other man was doing. On his way to the elevator, the older man looked at her again. Not with anger. With something colder than that, the flat, practical gaze of someone calculating the fastest way to remove an inconvenience. The doors closed. Chioma set down her coffee cup. Tell me. Vincenzo told her. She was a target now. The moment it had become clear to the people watching his organization that she mattered to him, she had stopped being invisible. His rivals would use her if they could, not out of malice, simply out of strategy. Leverage was leverage. And leaving the penthouse would not protect her. It would only mean she was exposed and alone rather than exposed and defended. He didn't stop there. He told her everything. The full architecture of his world, the arrangements, the territories, the relationships built on fear as much as loyalty, the things he had ordered done that he could not undo and did not pretend to be proud of. He laid it all on the table and left it there. When he finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Chioma looked at him steadily across the space between them. I'm still staying. He looked at her for a long moment. You understand what that means. I understand exactly what it means, she said. I'm still staying. A year changed things in ways that were difficult to explain to anyone who hadn't lived them. Chioma stood in front of the bathroom mirror on a Tuesday morning with no particular occasion attached to it, and looked at herself for a long moment. She was trying to locate the woman who had stood at an altar in a white dress holding flowers, waiting for a man to choose her. She could find her if she looked carefully. She was still there, somewhere in the architecture of the face looking back. But she was not the one running things anymore. The woman in the mirror had sat across a table from men who frightened other men and had not looked away. Had rebuilt something honest with her mother over a series of long, difficult phone calls that didn't resolve neatly but resolved truly. Had learned that her own instincts, which she had spent 3 years overriding in favor of Trevor's preferences, were in fact excellent. Trevor was a name that arrived occasionally in her periphery, a message passed through mutual contacts, a brief mention from a friend, and registered as almost nothing. Not pain. Not anger. Just information about someone who used to matter. She was thinking about none of this in particular when Vincenzo found her on the balcony that evening, the city laid out below them in its 10,000 lights. He stood beside her for a moment in the comfortable quiet they had built over 12 months. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and set a small box on the railing in front of her. She looked at it. Then at him. "We're already married," she said. "I know." His voice was low and unhurried, the same as it had always been. "I'm not asking you to marry me. I'm asking you to stay married to me. Because I love you. Because somewhere in the middle of all of this, without either of us planning for it, you became the one thing in my world I would choose before anything else." Chioma laughed. Then her eyes filled and the laugh and the tears existed at the same time, which felt exactly right. He opened the box. The ring was simple and perfect and caught the city lights. She held out her hand. He put it on her finger, and she turned into him, and they stood together above everything, two people who had found each other in the wreckage of one story and built something entirely their own, with both eyes open, and chose it anyway.